Why do you suck so much?
Okay. Why do I suck so much? Because your mom's busy. Straight to the mom. Went straight there.
Question to ask you, at this show, are you going to do Currency?
No!
Oh, please?
No.
Steve and I talked it over, and if everybody in the room can chant in unison, 78 cents or I piss on your flowers, they just might play it. So what do you say? We give it a go.
That was a little loose, don't you think? All right, on three, all right? 1, 2.
Steve Albini was a world-renowned recording engineer, best known for producing classic 90s albums such as Nirvana's In Utero, The Breeders' Pod, Bush's Razorblade Suitcase, and PJ Harvey's Rid of Me. But known to a lesser extent are his musical endeavors, his bands Big Black, Rape Man, and Shellac. These projects of his were quite influential in the world of noise rock, and in the specific case of Big Black, industrial rock. His musical creations and his preferred bands are certainly an acquired taste. The noisier the guitars are, the better as far as he's concerned, even going so far as to play with a copper pick with a notch cut out of the tip to hit the string twice for double the noisy metallic attack.
I used metal picks, picks made out of spring copper, and I have a friend who has a sheet metal punch, and he punches a little notch in the tip of the pick. So the picks have 2 points on them. I don't have one on me, otherwise I could show you, but it looks like a normal guitar pick, except made out of metal. And it's very thin, very springy metal. And then the tip of it has a little crescent shape notched out of it so that it has 2 points on the end. So when you hit the string, it hits it twice. And because it's made out of metal, it's a very sharp attack, very snappy, zinging attack. And it's just, I got into the habit of using them because the physical sensation of playing, their tactile response of it suits my playing style. And the feedback of that, helps me establish a rhythm in my playing.
That's so cool. Was that a typical thing in the underground punk scene in Chicago, or was that unique to you?
No, it was just me fucking around with different methods and finding something that I liked and hanging on to it. I mean, that's true of literally everything about my guitar playing. I'm not being modest here. I'm an extremely limited guitar player. I don't have the kind of skills that a typical guitar player would have because I didn't learn in a typical fashion. I learned how to tune the guitar, and then I've taught myself essentially everything else. And I never played in a cover band, so I never had to learn other people's songs. I never took formal guitar lessons, so I never learned any of the tropes or tricks that are kind of standard to guitar playing.
This noisy approach to guitar playing, minus the pick, was created in unison with his contemporaries, bands like Scratch Acid, Killdozer, Die Kreuzen, Swans, and the Butthole Surfers. Some of these bands Albini also having produced albums for. Quoting Albini from 1984, "Good noise is like orgasm." Steve Albini's first foray into music was listening to the Ramones' first album in his early teens, becoming a rabid fan almost immediately and buying every Ramones recording available to him at the time. He in fact credits his whole career to their first album. He also played in his first band called Just Ducky in high school. After graduating from high school in Missoula, Montana, he attended college in Chicago, eventually earning a degree in journalism. It was during this time he played in a few punk bands, wrote for local punk fanzines, and also engineered his first album in 1981. His first release was Big Black's debut EP, Lungs, which was released in 1982. He played every instrument on this EP except for a saxophone part played by a friend of his. The use of a drum machine on this EP set the stage for Big Black's sound, as they almost never used an actual drummer, only using an actual drummer a few times live. This helped influence and formulate the subgenre known as industrial rock, made most famous by industrial metal acts such as Ministry, Godflesh, Nine Inch Nails, Marilyn Manson, Rammstein, and KMFDM. Soon after his debut EP, Albini recruited Santiago Durango and Jeff Pezzati from fellow Chicago punk rock band act Naked Ray Gun.
Initially, like when I first started the band and Jeff and Santiago agreed to play in the band with me, I was dumbstruck. Like, both of those guys were giants to me, you know. Jeff and Santiago had been in Naked Ray Gun together, and Naked Ray Gun were like an epoch-making band in Chicago. They were one of the cornerstones of the scene, not just because their music was fantastic, but like they sort of exemplified how a band could conduct themselves. Like, they had a practice space in the basement of the house they rented, so all of their friends were welcome to use that practice space. They had a PA that they used for their gigs, so all of their friends were welcome to use their PA for their gigs. There was just they embodied the kind of camaraderie and we're all in this together kind of spirit, which initially appealed to me so much about the music scene here. You know, I really felt like everybody here was working on one big project. It wasn't that there were a bunch of disparate independent individual bands that were trying to make their mark or whatever. It was that you had a bunch of people that all wanted things to get more awesome, and they would do whatever it took to make them more awesome. And so Naked Ray Gun were, you know, a huge influence on me as a person and as a musician. And then to have the two principal members of Naked Ray Gun agree to be in a band with me was, I mean, flattering is not the right word for it. It was kind of, if you can imagine some guy playing in a bar band and he decides that he's going to start his own band, and, you know, Charlie Watts and Mick Jagger agree to be in his band with him. Like, it's that scale of dumbstruck is how I felt, you know. So I was intimidated by them, and I kind of idolized them a little bit. But as we got into the process of being in the band, it, you know, became a genuine collaboration and a genuine sharing of ideas and stuff.
Jeff Pezzati left Big Black in 1985 and was replaced by Dave Riley. After 2 full-length albums, Atomizer and Songs About Fucking, as well as several EPs and singles, Big Black called it quits in 1987. This live footage you're watching is from their final show, which took place in Seattle, Washington, and in attendance was a young Kurt Cobain. Albini continued with the short-lived Project Rape Man with bassist David William Sims and drummer Ray Washam, both from Scratch Acid. Albini had wanted a live drummer this time around instead of a drum machine. This project had a noisy sound similar to Big Black, albeit less industrial in tone. Rape Man only released one EP titled Bud, named after politician R. Bud Dwyer, who committed suicide on live TV, and one album titled Two Nuns and a Pack Mule, and a few singles before calling it quits, only lasting from 87 to 89. Albini later expressed regret for this project name being named after a Japanese manga, and he likened the band name to getting a bad tattoo. He also expressed regret for not taking the societal issue of misogyny seriously by using this band name. Shellac was Albini's next and final band, being formed in 1992 along with bassist Bob Weston and drummer Todd Trainer. This band's sound was exemplified by minimalist math-style noise rock, with everything angular and disjointed, including the lyrics. They released 6 full-length albums: At Action Park, Terraform, 1000 Hertz Professional, Excellent Italian Greyhound, Dude Incredible, and 2 All Trains, as well as 3 EPs, a live album, a compilation of Peel sessions, and a limited album limited to 779 copies given out to friends of the band. Albini unfortunately died of a heart attack a week before the release of their last album, 2 All Trains. The subsequent tour to support the album was canceled, and Shellac rightly dissolved. All the while, Albini's DIY approach was never more clear than in his approach to promoting and touring on his own musical endeavors.
So what were those early days like for you guys? I read that you guys are sometimes touring, you sleep on people's floors, you were crammed into cars. Like, what was that experience like, kind of just going from the ground up?
I mean, all of that stuff is just practical. Like, if you'd book a tour and you have a list of shows and you'd know pretty much how much you were going to be making on the tour. So you just work backwards from that. Like, well, how much can we spend? Well, we can only spend this much if we're going to come home with a profit. And I'm pretty proud of the fact that I've made a profit on every tour I've ever been on, just in a sense that we were aware of our limitations and we were comfortable working within them. Like, if you know you're only going to draw 100 people, and that means you're only going to make a couple $100 on the show, then you don't blow 70 or 80 of it on a hotel room. You just find a place to stay where it's not going to cost you anything. That's a purely practical matter. And every band every band in the underground operated the same way. Like, everybody shared information with each other and everybody hosted each other. So, like, if we played in Wisconsin, for example, we might stay with members of Killdozer, or we might, crash at the house of the radio DJ that got us the gig or something like that. If we played in Minneapolis, there was a sort of a fraternity of bands up there that we were sort of loosely affiliated with, and so we could all just scatter and stay at their houses. Like, the idea of getting a hotel room for your band to stay in seemed like an absurd indulgence that just nobody did. Like, just literally nobody did that.
One of the things I think is really cool about the underground punk scene is that so many of you guys, Big Black included, you would book your own shows, arrange your own press, that sort of thing. Was that ever really straining, having to do all that technical stuff as well as the music too?
No, I find it much less stressful than worrying about somebody else fucking something up for me. Like, even now, I don't have a manager, I don't have a lawyer. Our band books its own shows. We don't have a press person, we don't have a publicist. I find all of that stuff much easier to navigate than me having to call a manager who then has to call a publicist who then has to call his list of writers and then get availabilities and then call the manager and give the manager the list of availabilities, and then the manager confronts me with the list of availabilities, and then I go, just all this stuff is just so inefficient and so time consuming and so wasteful, and all of it costs money. So that means that you're burning more of a limited resource every time you indulge in these kind of formalities, and we just refuse to do it. Like, if just as a pure speculation here, let's pretend that you have a manager and a booking agent and a business manager and a tour manager, and your manager is taking 15%, or let's be generous and say 10%. Your manager is taking 10%. Your booking agent is taking 10%. Your tour manager is probably being paid $100 a day, something like that. So let's say you've booked a gig for $1,000. Off the top, your manager gets 100. Off the top, the booking agent gets 100. Off the top, your tour manager gets 100. Let's say you have a sound guy. You have to pay your sound guy $50 or $100. So there's another 100 shot. So now you're down to $600 for that gig. And let's say you spent $100 to get there on meals and gas and that sort of stuff. Now you're down to $500. And let's say you've got, you know, some consumable expenses for the gig, like guitar strings, drumsticks, you know, whatever. You could easily spend another $100 just on life, you know, during the period it takes you to get from home to the gig. And now you're down to like $400 profit from the gig. And if there's 4 of you in the band, that means each of you gets $100 out of that for all of that work. That means more than half of the money that comes in has been just sprayed out into all of these ancillary expenses. But if you cut all those things out, like if you don't have a manager, if you don't have a booking agent, if you don't have a tour manager, you know, if you manage your own affairs in that way, you can often nearly double the amount that you realize from normal activities like playing a show or, you know, royalties that you're paid from a record or deal from selling records, or the merchandise that you sell after a gig, like you sell t-shirts or records after a gig. If you're not paying somebody to take care of that stuff for you, you get to keep all the money. You know, these are all just practical things. It's not a philosophical thing like I want to be in control of my own life. It's just a simple practical matter of we're dealing with things on a small scale, a small number of people, a small amount of money, a small infrastructure. So it doesn't make sense to have a large administration siphoning money out of that small relationship, you know? And that's just talking about the money. The practical aspect extends to other things as well. Like if you run a club and I call you to book a show and I give you the dates that we're looking for and you say, yeah, and we book it, then we're done in one conversation, right? If I tell a booking agent, if I tell my manager that we want to go on tour and he tells the booking agent, and the booking agent has to go through all of his voodoo and find all of the routings and things and come up with his, like the people that he's trying to curry favor with and all that sort of stuff, and eventually it comes back to you, you know, I still have to approve all of that stuff. Like I would still have to agree to do all of that stuff. So in a sense, all we've done is just made a single conversation between you and me last weeks of deliberation through officiaries and secondary people. And it's just, it doesn't make any sense to me to buffer myself from those kinds of decisions. If we can do them ourselves, it's just orders of magnitude faster and easier and more efficient. And it means that we don't have to be like we don't have to charge as much for our shows. We don't have to, or given that we charge the same amount as we would anyway, we'll make more out of it. So it takes the pressure off of having to play many shows because the margins are so thin, you know? Like you don't have to do a 20-date tour. You can do a 5-date or 10-date tour and make just as much money.
So I guess the practicality of avoiding all this extra bureaucratic yellow tape, is that partly why you guys didn't want a major label deal?
Well, I mean, there are a couple of things at play there. Like in the beginning, when I was doing Big Black all by myself, if I had sent those demos or those records out and a big record label had approached me and said, hey, we want to sign you to our big record label, I would have signed the first fucking thing that anybody waved in front of me. Of course I would have. You know, I was stone fucking ignorant. I would have signed literally the first thing anybody waved at me. I would have signed it, right? But as I got more involved in the music scene, the social environment of the music scene, I got to see how other bands related to their record labels and what problems they started to express. And I started to see the ways that those relationships could go sour. And extrapolating from that, I started to see how small bands on big labels were really badly treated, meaning they weren't taken seriously by the big record labels because they had a small audience and they were going to be unprofitable. And it just didn't seem like it was a worthwhile endeavor. Like, it didn't seem like no big record label could help a band that was only going to be selling a few thousand records. A big record label would only ever be a problem in that regard. Like, if your band is selling less than 10,000 records, a big record label is going to see that as a horrific embarrassment and immediately try to put you out of business, immediately try to kill your band, right? But if you're doing it on your own, selling records out of your house or whatever, selling 10,000 records is a big fucking deal. Like, you can make, that's $40,000 or $50,000 that you'll make out of that one record, and that's a sustainable existence for a band to put records out on that scale. So if you keep things small and keep things under your own control, you can be a lot more efficient about it. And if you get involved with a big system, like a big industry that expects large numbers and high turnover and profit margins, then you're just going to disappoint those people and you're going to be viewed as a failure. And the whole process is going to be uncomfortable. So we just avoided it because being fair, we didn't get offered that much stuff. Like, we would occasionally be approached by somebody who had an office at a big record label, and we just told them we weren't interested. But it's not like we were Chance the Rapper or something, where we were like this plum waiting to be plucked to sell millions of records. Like, that just wasn't, that wasn't our world. Nothing excites me. I'm 55 years old. I've been doing this every day for 30 plus years. Nothing excites me. It's all work, right? It's a very satisfying job. I love my job, and I get to work with the most interesting people on earth, and I get to allow people to fulfill their creative ambitions, which is extremely rewarding. But there's no ecstasy in my execution of my job. It's a job.
Albini had been engineering albums other than his own since 1981, but him engineering the Pixies' debut album Surfer Rosa in 1988 gave him the springboard he needed to turn it into a career. During a break between bands from 89 to 92, he notably engineered the Jesus Lizards' debut EP Pure, as well as their first three albums, Head, Goat, and Liar, the Breeders' debut album Pod, Helmet's classic second album Meantime, Failure's debut album Comfort, Jawbreaker's third album 24-Hour Revenge Therapy, and also PJ Harvey's second album Rid of Me. But his most notable engineering credit came from Nirvana's third and final album In Utero, when he was selected by the band themselves as they were looking for more raw sound to contrast the polished sound of their breakout second album Nevermind. This engineering credit established him as a widely known engineer, but quarrels with Nirvana's label about the final product led to the label tarnishing Albini's name and dragging him through the mud for quite some time. His engineering career only really kicked back up by him opening his own recording studio, Electrical Audio, in Chicago, and also from producing Bush's second album, Razorblade Suitcase, in 1996, and Robert Plant and Jimmy Page's 1998 album, Walking into Clarksdale. From this point on, his engineering prowess paid the bills, and his ongoing band Shellac was there as a purely creative endeavor and a break from the pitfalls of adult responsibilities. Albini was very unique among audio engineers, first in the fact that he did not want to refer to himself as a producer and instead as an engineer, claiming that a producer credit implies some artistic input on an album he is working on, and he was a strong believer in letting the band or artist have complete artistic control, and his only job was to just record the album and solve any technical problems that may or may not arise. He did not request credit on an album, and when he had been credited, it had not been at his request. His last daily rate was $900 per day, less than a quarter of most other producers of his experience, and if a band ran out of money, he would graciously and generously finish the project unpaid, preferring not to leave the work undone. He would also work with anyone regardless of personal preference, and he wouldn't require an audition and only expected the band or artist to take their work seriously. All of his production work was purely analog, and he had quite a distaste for any digital format. He did, however, see a silver lining in the democratization of the internet and bands and artists being able to reach their audience directly, sell physical media to their audience directly, while at the same time being able to subvert and circumvent the parasitic capitalistic music business. And quite possibly the most noble and honorable stance of his is the fact that he never took royalties from record sales for albums he worked on, which is an unbelievably rare stance to take.
And then you shockingly say, I'm not taking points on this record. I don't want to do that. You said, I want to be paid like a plumber. Just give me some money up front, but you thought it was immoral to get points in the record.
Yeah, I mean, the way that record producers and recording people are compensated at that time in particular was a trick of accounting that shifted the cost away from the label and toward the band, made the band ultimately responsible for whatever the producer got paid. And it didn't come out of the general proceeds of the record the way it would in an independent label's contract, for example. It came specifically out of the money that would otherwise have gone to the band. Like literally every dollar I would get paid would mean that was a dollar that Dave didn't get, or Chris didn't get, or Kurt didn't get. I mean, that's just the way the accounting works in those kinds of deals. And I think that's ethically untenable. I'll admit that I think less of people who opt to do things that way. I think it's on its face, it's absurd. Like I work on a record for a few days, and then for the rest of your fucking life, you have to keep paying me. Like you give me a chip off of every nickel that you earn.
I'd like you to talk to my agent and my manager, if you would.
Steve Albini was certainly a rare breed, never wavering from his deeply held beliefs and ideals, regardless of whether or not it was beneficial for his well-being. At the end of the day, the most important thing was the music and the purely creative artistic endeavor of music, and in all the ways it is created. His humble mantra might be best summed up by his band Big Black's core ideals. Quote, organizationally, we were committed to a few basic principles. Treat everyone with as much respect as they deserve and no more. Avoid people who appeal to our vanity or ambition. They always have an angle. Operate as much as possible apart from the music scene, which was never our stomping ground. And take no shit from anyone in the process.
to apologize for the fascist haircut that I have right at the moment. It's a result of a misunderstanding. I went into my normal barber and I said, I'd like a relatively short flat top, please. And he misunderstood me and thought that I'd said, make me look like a Nazi sympathizer. And I apologize for the impression I might be giving. I am, in fact, no friend to fascists or capitalists or any of the other political swine that cover the earth like gnats.